It caught me not far from Peremyshal in the early morning, when I thought I'd sooner pass the company and to Moscow, to the credit session of correspondence students of the engineering faculty of the Armored Forces Academy. It's getting light. Dawn is breaking behind the stern of my car. The grey ribbon of the highway is drowning in fog. The fog stretches along the ravine and clings in the distance to the peaked roofs of Peremyshal. I am leading a company of T-37 tankers. My duty, as a military representative at the machine-building plants of the Odessa Group, is to hand over the company to the headquarters of the H Unit, standing in a place near Peremyshal. After that I have to go to Odessa, to the place of my service, and from there I can go to Moscow. Ivan Krivulia, a junior political officer, assigned to the post of deputy politician of the company, rides with me on the head tank. Krivulia tells me about his life in Odessa, where he studied at the courses for junior political officers. I listen to the story of his meeting on the dance floor of the Odessa Park of Culture and Recreation with a certain beautiful Masha, from whom it seems that all the youth of the January plant goes crazy and who will soon be his wife. I look at Krivulia and think he is still young, not solid somehow for a political officer. Being carried away by memories of his Masha, Krivulia fell on me in the tower at a sharp turn of the car. He fixes his big dark blonde bangs, dishevelled by the fall. It all annoys me, I say. And you, Comrade Krivulia, will hardly make a political officer. Krivulia smiles with such a good-natured look, as if he had heard this many times before. Do you think I'm weak? He asks. You're almost right, I say. Krivulia tells me about himself. It turns out that he served 3 years on active duty in the post of Pomkomvod battery, and has already been to war. Served in the artillery and raved about tanks. When his regiment was reorganized into a tank regiment, he decided to stay on superannuation. In the Finnish campaign, he was a petty officer, tank commander. The conversation is conducted in a completely different tone. Krivulia says, Only in the war one began to think about life. I'm sitting once under the bottom of the tank, warming it up and thinking. You haven't done much yet. Krivulia has not gone far in life, but the time is such that everyone has to do a lot. So that's what you are. I laugh. Now you look more like a political officer. After the war, whatever I look at, everything seems to be the first time I've seen it. Krivulia continues in the same tone. I only regret that human life is short and I won't have time to do everything I want, but I decided to choose the most important things in life. When the war ended, the commissar of the regiment called me and said, with you, Comrade Krivulia, the soldiers fought cheerfully, and although your surname is crooked, but you keep the general line in the war correctly. We need people like you. Go, he said, to the courses of junior political officers for the theory, and you know how to agitate in practice. So I grabbed the bridle of theory, he finished, and a mischievous smile played on his thin face again. We are approaching Peremyshal at full dawn. Only a light haze of mist remains. The day promises to be wonderful. The fresh breeze from the fast ride blows in my face. It's nice to think that in an hour or two I'll hand over the company to the division, and maybe I'll be able to leave for Odessa today. It is only necessary not to delay in Odessa, and then I will get to Moscow on time. My short reflection was interrupted by the monotonous howling of engines, which drowned out the noise of our convoy. I saw a rippling cloud in the sky ahead of me. This cloud was moving along the highway, growing and quickly approaching us. Here we could clearly see big black airplanes with predatorily stretched forward, light beaks and white crosses on the wings. It's the Germans, shouted Krivulia. There were such in Finland. Is it really war? As if to confirm his words, distant explosions came from the direction of Peremyshal. Somewhere nearby there was a deafening shriek, and overhead with an aching howl flew alien airplanes. War. With only one lip I said to Krivulia. I signalled with a flag, do as I do, and then, without realizing why I was doing it, I drove the column off the highway into the rye and accelerated the movement. The thought that the war had begun had not yet entered my head, but Moscow had already become distant. When I entered the headquarters, the division commander, a young colonel, was talking on the telephone, nervously hurrying someone to leave, at the same time reprimanding the intendant, taking maps from the commanders who approached him, scribbling something on them, waving his hand to someone. Hurry up, hurry up. To be in time, the commanders rushed to the door. In a word, the war had begun. The window glass was shattered by a close bomb burst. The pale divisional intendant squatted down. His example was instinctively followed by me and the commanders who were in the headquarters, but when we saw that the colonel was standing, we all rose quickly, embarrassed and hiding our eyes. Don't panic. That's what war is for shooting, said the colonel with a slight chuckle. Who are you? He asked me. I reported. Good? Good, he said, and suddenly raised his voice. Wait, so in the company only a political officer, and who will command? The Germans can break into Peremishal any minute now. Our regiments are just leaving the camps, and I have nothing to cover their deployment. Your company would be perfect for reconnaissance, and you've brought me a company without a commander. Comrade Colonel, I said, let me temporarily remain commander of this company. My business trip is over. Returning from you, I had to go to study. I showed my business card. On the catcher, and the beast runs, said the colonel, having run his eyes over the paper. Well, get the task. And he invited me to the map that covered the whole table. My company, picking its way through the unprecedented wheat harvest, is on the right flank of the division. It's hot. The midday sun is blazing. Far to the left is Peremishal. The city is in smoke. Only spires of churches are visible. Leaving the company in the ravine, we with Crivulia and the commander of my car went up to the ridge. Here was entrenched liquid chain of fighters of the rifle battalion. At the edge of a field of sunflowers stood a battery of anti-tank guns. Behind the guns lay a dead lieutenant, the commander of this battery, and a seriously wounded senior sergeant. The battery was commanded by a sergeant, a Tatar with black, perky eyes. Thick sunflowers, rising on the ridge, and in the middle of it broke off with a green wall, well camouflaged us and the rest of the company below. From the ridge, it is clear to me that the flank of the division is open. I decided to send Crivulia with one platoon to a farmhouse visible ahead, so that then the whole company could advance westward from there. Crivulia, ducking down, poked his head out of the sunflowers. Look. There's already. I lifted myself up and saw a detachment of German motorcyclists entering the farm from the west side. Behind him, 2 kilometers away, some black dots were moving. Also motorcyclists. I thought, and suddenly for myself, probably because for the first time in my life I saw an armed enemy in front of me, I shouted. Crivulia, Germans. I did not recognize my own voice. It seemed alien to me. On the German motorcycles with shrapnel, I heard a command from a Tatar sergeant on the left. Hey, cannoneers! Artillery! Don't shoot! Shouted Crivulia. This loud word, artillery, applied to the little battalion cannons, brought me to my senses at once. To the battery. I commanded Crivulia and rushed to the sergeant, dictating to the commander of my car a radiogram to headquarters. The motorcyclists were coming out unhesitatingly on the eastern edge of the farm, firing incessantly from machine guns in the direction of the border guards. You will shoot when they begin to retreat, but now freeze, I ordered the sergeant, lying down beside him. And I briefly outlined my plan to Crivulia. He was to stay here with one platoon and take command of the battery. The sergeant, hearing this, happily declared, I agree, take command, and I'll go to my gun. Crivulia liked my plan too. Good, hurry up, or you'll be late. Gun's my element, I'll give them a dump, he said, waving his forelock in the direction of the motorcyclists. My little girl, in the eye of 2 platoons of tankers, scraping the bottom on the bumps of the gully, sharply carried to the grove, on the edge of which just rose black fountains. I have not yet received an answer to my radiogram, and this worries me. Perhaps I'm doing the wrong thing, I think. No one ordered me to get into combat. My duty is to observe and report to headquarters what I see, not to help my neighbours. but I cannot indifferently watch as before my eyes the enemy bypasses us. I remember the reports of our newspapers about how the German motorcyclists acted in France in 1940, and decide that now the most important thing is not to allow the enemy to break through to the rear of our troops. We managed to get ahead of the Germans and occupy the western edge of the grove. But no sooner had the left flank platoon of Senior Sergeant Zubov turned off the engines than a group of German motorcyclists jumped out on the ridge that covered the farm 400 meters away from us. The motorcyclists kept moving, and it calmed me down. I decided that they did not notice our tankers in the grove. Suddenly one of the motorcyclists waved a flag, pointing in my direction. Without aiming, I pressed the trigger of the machine gun, and in the heat of the moment, released the entire disc. When the motorcycle was finished, I signaled attack with my racket, and the car took me to the edge of the forest. To see if my signal was received, I leaned out of the turret. This carelessness almost cost me my life. Only an accidental turn of the tank saved me from a machine gun track. It swept before my eyes. My signal is received. On the right flank, Zubov's platoon is already crushing the motorcycles and pushing them towards me. With a move, I crashed into a group of motorcyclists and poured machine gun bursts into it. 43-wheeled machines scatter in all directions. My tank can't make sharp turns. This makes me angry. I curse and pursue the enemy in a straight line to the ridge. I repeat the signal. Tankets rush to me, shooting on the move, who did not have time to hide behind the ridge motorcyclists. Both platoons followed the fleeing enemy, swung over the ridge, and I saw above the green waves of wheat chain of large dark machines. They were pulling their guns behind them. Barely in time to give a red flare, I fired almost point blank at the wide glass of an oncoming machine. Shuddering and skewed, it froze in place. I am behind the armor of the tank. It seems to me that these howling Germans, who are falling out of the bodies of cars, are defenseless against me, and some kind of weight falls on my arm. I try to overcome it, but the barrel of the machine gun still rises up. I feel that I can't shoot at point-blank range at these panic-stricken men. The blue caps of fleeing German infantrymen flicker in the wheat. Smoke and flames scattered across the field, scattered hulks of tracked vehicles that I had never seen before, from which the Germans had not had time to unhitch their guns. We were running between the burning tractors, forgetting about the motorcyclists who had fled in the direction of the farm. But here on my right flashed a tank that was walking next to me. The Germans had already come to their senses and were throwing grenades at us. The heaviness immediately fell from my arm. Soldiers in blue pilots again run away from me, but now the barrel of my machine gun is no longer up. Suddenly something sharply and unfamiliar whistled above my head, and I saw the towers of enemy tanks appearing from the side of the farm. More and more tanks were coming out from behind the ridge. Now their battle order was clearly drawn out with an angle forward. The top of this angle was pulling towards the Sunflower, threatening to cut us off from Krivuli's battery. The German tanks were no more than 1.5 kilometers away. No sooner had I thought I was in the wrong business than I heard in my headphones the hoarse voice of the headquarters radio, transmitting to me the order of the division commander: detain and destroy the motorcyclists. Cover. I realized that my reconnaissance was over and I had to cover the flank and the rifle battalion approaching somewhere behind. But what to cover with? One hope for Krivuli's artillery. It is necessary to quickly swing to the right behind the slope on which it stands, otherwise my tankets with only Degtyaryov's machine guns will be killed like chickens. Throwing out the signal "do as I do," I turn the car left 90 and, continuously maneuvering, hurry to get out of the shelling. The vehicles follow my order. Mechanics squeeze out of their little ones all their reserve speed. Now it is clear that we are the target of German tanks. Shooting from the move, they take the left and go in front of us. A shell-blasted turret rolled off the tank that overtook me, and the machine shuddered and stopped. It seems to me that I am not breathing. I would only have to pass over the saving ridge. Here already flashed the corner of a field of sunflowers, at the opposite end of which, closer to the Germans, are the guns Krivuli. Impatiently I look in that direction, but I do not notice a single shot at the tanks attacking us. Did he really get frightened and run away? I think with horror. Something clapped deafeningly in my ears. Swerving stern, my tank convulsively cut off the run. The car smelled flames in my face. Into me, I thought, and I flew out of the turret, fell to the ground, and lay stunned for a moment. There is a second explosion in the tank, and a fountain of fire bursts out through the turret hatch. I try to roll away from the fire, but I can't move. Probably dead, I think. And suddenly I hear the calm voice of Mechanic Senior Officer Nikitin. "Be patient, Comrade Commander." He grabbed me across and lifted me above the ground. This shaking finally brought me to my senses. I heard the friendly volley of our anti-tank guns. "It's Krivulia," I shouted with joy that I was in one piece and that the guns were firing. We are coming out of the sunflowers. From afar it seems that the shots of our guns flash at the very sides of the German tanks. We see how over some machines only smoke is rising, and over others thick columns of smoke are already growing, stretching into the sky. The clear combat order of the German tanks is broken. Now the Germans do not care about us. Having turned back and aimlessly shooting back, they retreat to the farm and hide somewhere behind it at the border river. The third platoon of tankers left with Krivulia went on a counterattack and mowed down the chains of German infantry that had fallen behind their tanks. Finally, I breathed freely and began to assemble my company. I remember everything that I experienced in a few minutes, this instant change of successes and failures. Yes, the war is not as easy and smooth as it is often written and told about. I can't say that I'm discouraged, depressed. On the contrary, I am in a very excited state. I was embarrassed that I, a technician, volunteered to command a company. There was a worm of doubt in the back of my mind, will I be able to cope? Now I feel more confident. On our section of the Germans no longer repeated attacks, and limited themselves to incessant artillery and mortar fire, which led from across the river. It did not harm our tankers, who had taken shelter in the ravine, but it did a lot of damage to the farm and the sunflower planting. Soon a battalion of infantry approached us. We learned from the commander that the Germans, having broken through the defence of the frontier outposts to the north of the town, had taken the empty Perimarschall, to which the regiments of the division that had left the camps had not had time to approach, and that now the main forces of the division had been thrown there with the task of repelling the town and restoring the situation. The battalion had not yet taken up the defences, as I received orders to take the tankers to the headquarters area. A telegram from the district about the redirection of my company was waiting for me at headquarters. The cipher indicated the number of the tank division, for manning which it was intended. Here, at the headquarters, I surrendered the prisoners we had captured. They were 2 artillery sergeants. They were both tall, about 25 or 8 years old, with stubbly hair cut into a hedgehog. One was a farmer from Prussia, the other a labourer from Silesia. Their arrogance had not yet weathered. They held themselves like victors, did not feel like prisoners. The soldiers and commanders surrounded them in a tight crowd. An hour ago, in the battle with these Germans, we lost 6 comrades. And amazingly, neither I nor any other of our men had any anger towards them. I only had some strange feeling of confusion. I did not know how to behave with them. In my heart I resented their arrogance, but I could not get rid of the thought that one of them was a labourer, the other a peasant. The same thought worried everyone. The tankers who surrounded the prisoners asked them why they were fighting against us. The Germans shrugged their shoulders perplexedly, not understanding or not wanting to understand the interpreter. When they were offered a smoke of makorka, they shouted Nein, shook their heads, took a pack of cigarettes out of their pockets and began to offer them to the tankers, flicking shiny metal lighters. "Oh, cigarettes. Look at what their soldiers are smoking." The tankers spoke in surprise, smoking German cigarettes. And a minute later everyone was spitting up. Damn. It just pinches my tongue. Swan. And someone said cheerfully and convincingly, "No, brothers, our Ma is much better." The kitchens arrived, and Petty Officer Nikitin, a blue-eyed Volshanian athlete, a lover of good food and treats, offered the prisoners a fat, steaming soup. But even the soup was met with a contemptuous nein. The Germans took out lollipops wrapped in shiny cellophane paper. No, came the voices. Not convincing. Candy can't replace soup. I suddenly find this conversation disgusting, and I abruptly cut it off. The prisoners are taken away to the headquarters, and the crews, overtaking one another, hurry with kettles to the kitchen. Well, Comrade Artillery Commander, I said, dissatisfied with myself, and vented my anger on Krivula, who had taken no part in the conversation with the prisoners and was eating his long-awaited dinner. Tell me, why did you keep silent for so long there in the sunflower? This is the second time he's calmly explained it to me. If I'd opened fire earlier, they'd have killed my guns at long range, and you wouldn't have gotten away. I saw that they didn't shoot at the rear cars, they wanted to capture you alive, so they ran into me. The only people who got hurt were those who wanted to run away, he said, and a sly light flashed in his eyes. A pebble in my garden, I think. I still can't believe it now, Krivula says, sipping his soup with gusto. Not a single miss. Understand, he threateningly shakes his spoon above his head. 10 burning tanks at once encircled his battery, and then a dozen slowed down forever. What a thing. We're bigger, Nikitin shouted to him, not taking his eyes off the pot. 12 tractors set on fire and motorcycles did not even have time to count. So then I did not have to go behind the hill. Hurt by Krivula's mockery, I say. Why not? That's exactly what you should have done. That's what ruined the German attack. Everything worked out right for you. Only my advice to you, if you ever have to escape on a tank, then do not try to outrun everyone, but retreat with the general mass, he says, half-voiced, smiling into the kettle placed on his lap. I keep silent and think what a prickle Petty Officer Smirnov, the commander of the 1st Platoon, who lost 3 out of 4 tankets, intervenes in the conversation. It was good, because with only machine guns against heavy tanks, he says. It's a pity for the Klopets. Suddenly everyone turns their heads to the house with the collapsed wall. From the wind-swaying mouthpiece comes the familiar voice of the announcer. Our cause is right. The enemy will be defeated. Victory will be ours. After a short pause, the announcer announces that a recording of a radio speech by the Deputy Chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, Comrade Molotov, on the treacherous German attack on the USSR has been transmitted. How to find this tank division, to which my company is forwarded. That's the task, I thought, but in the headquarters, when I said this, laughed and pointed to the spire of some church issuing from behind the forest. There it is behind the place, east of us, in the woods. On the way there I met the commander, who willingly confirmed that Colonel Vasiliev's tank division was concentrated there, in the forest and in the big village behind it. He said that he himself had arrived with it from Gorodok, which I did not ask him about. I don't like this wordiness. It was not difficult to find the headquarters, as there were cars whizzing around it. The division commander, Colonel Vasiliev, having listened to my report and twirling in his hands handed him a telegram, looked at me with surprise. Wasn't it your company they told me about? So you have already fought? I fought a little, I answered, hesitating. Get acquainted. Colonel introduced me to the commanders present in the headquarters. Please love and welcome the hero of the first and, frankly speaking, disgraceful for the Germans meeting with our tankets. And to me, he laughed, they said that the Germans were beaten up by some super amphibians, but these super amphibians are just little ones. Well, how is the situation there? He asked me. I said that the attack was repulsed, infantry and tanks came up. Do you hear? The colonel again turned to the commanders. It turns out that the situation at the front has nothing to do with what the alarmists tell on the road. This made me remember the meeting after the battle with some liaison, caught me on the road. With eyes widened with fear, he shouted from the car, without stopping it, on the move, that everything was lost, the headquarters was defeated, the commander was killed, the Germans were advancing, and at the same time he turned his head so dazedly, as if the Germans were already here, about to jump out from behind the bushes. Why didn't I stop the car and grab this panic-stricken man by the scruff of the neck, I thought, taking the colonel's reproach to myself. The colonel's stern, dry face, his strong, but not harsh voice seemed familiar to me. I tried to remember where I had met him. With a firm and swift movement of his hands, he threw aside the sides of his leather jacket to straighten his dark gymnast jacket under the tightly drawn belt. In the semi-darkness, shivering in the restless candle flame, the Order of Lenin gleamed. Wasn't it the same Vasiliev whose exploits in the war with the White Finns Mirzachev and his comrades told me so fervently, I thought? It was in the summer of 1940 at the regular academic session of correspondence students of the Faculty of Engineering. One day in the CDCAA, my buddy Petya Mirzachev, grabbing me by the elbow, pointed with his eyes at a youthfully slender lieutenant colonel passing by. "Lieutenant Colonel Vasiliev," he whispered to me. It was strange to see next to me, in an ordinary environment, a man about whom legends are told. Vasiliev sat down with his companion at a table not far from us. I began to listen to their conversation, and was very upset that I heard only one phrase of little importance to me. "It's a pity that grey rocks on stage make blue," said Vasiliev. The second time I saw Vasiliev in the club at the evening of the meeting of students of the command faculty with the front-line soldiers. He was surrounded by a group of excellent students. Nearby, gleaming glasses, stood tactics teacher Colonel Rotmistrov, very attentively listening to Vasiliev, and occasionally said, as if to himself, "Interesting." New at the conclusion of the conversation, Vasiliev, addressing the young commanders, said, "Your excellent knowledge is the guarantee of success, but it will not be if you do not teach people to always remember their duty as soldiers and citizens." Of course, that's him. Now I stand before him as his subordinate, out of happiness that I in Vasiliev's division, and that he paid attention to me, introduced me almost as a hero. When Vasiliev talked about the moral impact that have on people who had not been previously under fire, the mass raids of German aircraft, I immediately remembered the final words of his conversation with the students of the academy. "Where the commander is strong, the fighter is unshakable," continued the colonel in the same amazingly smooth and steady voice as he had then in Moscow. "But you, Lieutenant Colonel Bolkovitinov, today managed to lose a whole heavy battalion on the march." Even in the faint flicker of the candle it was visible how the lieutenant colonel's face darkened, flushed with paint. He stretched out and began to justify himself. From the words of Bolkovitinov, I realized that the first group of enemy bombers direct hit by bombs knocked out 3 heavy vehicles of his regiment. They blocked the highway. Bolkovitinov had to give the command to get off the highway and continue moving on the sides. "That's where the mess started," he justified himself. "Some of them lost their engines when turning, others landed their cars in the ditch. Now I received a report all the cars that were stuck are being towed out and are coming here." A cipher operator ran into the room several times, deciphering some radiogram in parts. Listening to Bolkovitinov, Vasiliev read this radiogram and hurried the cipher operator. When Bolkovitinov finished, Vasiliev, who had not interrupted him, suddenly warned sharply, apparently addressing not only Bolkovitinov, but also everyone, that from now on for such confusion he would remove people from command, as they had failed to fulfill their duty to the fatherland, and, as if softening the sharpness of the warning, added in the same tone, "If a soldier is loyal to duty, he will, under any circumstances, keep the weapons entrusted to him." These words, or rather, the surprisingly smooth, calm intonation with which they were said, brought me back to the situation of the memorable meeting of front-line soldiers with the students of the academy. And although there were gunshots rattling quite close, and even gun and machine gun crackling could be heard, I forgot for a moment that the war had already begun, that I was at the front. "Your company is assigned to a reconnaissance battalion," said the colonel, bringing me back to reality. "The chief of staff will formalize, and tomorrow you will receive a platoon of BTS to complete the company." I was not able to say that I am not a builder, but a technician must surrender the company and go to Odessa. I'll say it another time. Now is inconvenient, I decided. Somewhere close by a bomb fell, and precisely from its explosion, the door of the room opened wide. From the dark frame of the door, with his head slightly ducked, stepped a short, sturdy commander. From the Corps headquarters, he introduced himself to Vasiliev, handing him a package. The colonel and the commander who arrived from the Corps headquarters bent over the map lying on the table. I was waiting for instructions from the Chief of Staff, to whom Veseliev handed my telegram, previously scribbled something on it. Bolkovitinov, standing next to me, pelted me with questions. Well, how are the German tanks? What is so special about them? How did you fight on the tanks? I fought with infantry, with tanks, and with artillery, I answered uncertainly. Something at you, senior, comes out like that you threw their hats, smiled Bolkovitinov. I would certainly have thrown them, but it's a pity I lost my hats while running away, I said in tune with him. That's fair, Bolkovitinov was pleased. Well, what about the Germans? Nothing. They're burning. From machine guns? No, from cannons. And I began to tell about the artillery, which took under his command Krivulia, but at that time Veseliev straightened up and demanded attention. He outlined the situation. In the area of Peremyshal, the enemy only demonstrates offensive. Genuine offensive with success, the Germans are northward, in the direction of Yavoriv. The division during the night should make a return march with a bypass of Lvov from the north and concentrate east of it, in the area of Kurowis. For some commanders, the return march is just right on the way they will pick up their equipment and unload the highway finished Vasiliev. He suggested that the regiment commanders transfer from his map to their own route to the area of concentration. Everyone rushed to the table. I, having received an order from the Nachstaber to transfer my company to the location of the reconnaissance battalion, flew out to the porch, where silent sentries were peering into the darkness. In my haste to fulfill the order, I forgot to ask where the reconnaissance battalion was located. It was awkward to return. Chagrined at my inexcusable blunder, I swore out loud. Ah, damn. How to find the reconnaissance battalion now? What do you need it for? Asked me someone sitting on a bench near the porch. I am the commander of a new reconnaissance company, I said. The instructor of the political department, Belovitnev, rose up and introduced himself. So you are on the replenishment. Pleased to meet you. I can show you out. Let's go. On the way, he hurries to share with me the latest staff news. I listen to him not very carefully, because above us howling invisible in the darkness Junkers, and somewhere nearby, must be in a place, bombs are bursting. Imagine what insolence. My companion is indignant. It was just getting dark and Emka pulled up to the operative's office. The major comes out, straight to the duty officer. He came, they say, from the front headquarters to inspect the units. He was on his way here with our deputy polite, and the deputy polite pointed out to him the operative department. He wants the operative to draw the regiment's location on his map. But now Captain Karev is on duty. He's a good guy. Show me, he says, a business trip and a certificate. Took the documents, looked through and says to the major, sorry, I'm only the assistant duty officer. I'll send for the map to the duty officer right away. You sit. And pulls a chair over to the major. Lieutenant, he orders his assistant, take the major's documents and run to Karchenko. Tell him that you need the situation. Let him give a working map. I am standing next to him, listening, and I don't understand. Karchenko is the head of the special department, but what does he have to do with it? So I blurted out to Karev, since when are the employees of the special department on duty at the headquarters? The whistle of a falling bomb interrupts his story. We rush into a roadside ditch. In a minute we get up, we go on. My companion is in a hurry to finish. So. I lied, and Karev shouted at me, give me your map. I'll mark on it, so as not to delay the major. I don't understand anything. I give him my map. And he whispers to me, why are you sticking your nose where it doesn't belong? I would have said something else. But then the commandant of the headquarters with machine gunners came in and asked the representative to go to the commander. It turned out to be a small mistake in the business trip. What do you say to that? A spy. I've already confessed. Yes, now keep your eyes open, I said. And I thought to myself, why didn't you ask me for my papers? Our tank division, as a part of the whole corps, is making a return 120-kilometer march from near Peremyshal through Lvov to Kurowis. Despite the deep night, it is as bright as day. The greenish light of the German illuminating bombs goes out at times, and then it seems that a dark, impenetrable curtain falls before the eyes. Junkers, invisible to us in the blinding light of the German lights, incessantly carried over the highway and bombed our column. We drive past broken and burning in ditches. There are also tanks that have fallen into ditches. Crews are fidgeting near them. Flashed a tank, broken by a direct hit of a bomb. This is the road of the day march of our division. I am afraid not to get jammed on the road, not to get stuck in the tail of the column of Captain Mazayev's battalion from Bolkovitinov's regiment. I stretch the distance between the cars to 50 meters. And this, it seems, saves me from fragmentation charges. Our anti-aircraft machine guns are continuously firing. Blinded by the alternating bright light and inky darkness, the anti-aircraft gunners are helpless. Nevertheless, their firing has an encouraging effect on us. I, with the company, go to the head of the battalion. On our car rides Komsomol worker of the political department, political officer Belivitnev, with whom I already feel like an old comrade. My combat, a captain, surnamed Skauchkov, moves behind the headquarters following us. I do not know why, but the captain at the first meeting caused me and Krivuli dislike for himself. There is a look, there is a language, there is an award, but a man you cannot see said to me about him, Krivulia. We pass by the military town, where the day before yesterday our division lived a peaceful life. Set on fire by German aviation, half a kilometre away, some buildings are burning. Belivitnev shows me the burning park and barracks of Bolkovitinov's regiment. And here is my apartment, he pointed to a house with open windows, by which we are passing. In that window I last saw my wife, leaving for the regiment with packet number 1. Our secretary said that he saw her later at the station before the German air raid among the commander's wives loading into the train. I don't know what happened to her. We were waiting for our son, he said after a moment's silence. Did you have time to take the cars out of the park? I asked him to distract him from his anxious thoughts. It turned out that the tanks survived thanks to the drill. The day before in the division headquarters was Deputy Police Officer of the Corps Popel. In conversation with the commander, he started talking about the fact that combat training should be brought closer to the reality of the war, which, by all appearances, is close. Apparently under the influence of this conversation, Vasiliev and ordered to withdraw the division at 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday, when no one expected the alarm. And you know what's interesting, Belivitnev said. Everyone was terribly dissatisfied. I went into the barracks to check on the rise, and I heard voices, it's a day off, and they won't let me sleep. Couldn't the alarm have been postponed to Monday? No one was thinking about the war. And no sooner had the last company of tanks left the park than the barracks were left in rubble. Those who delayed were left behind. The Germans didn't postpone the war until Monday. We approached Lvov at about 7 a.m. on June 23rd. Here we were met by the Corps Commander, Lieutenant General Rybyshev. He stood on the highway and turned the division to the left, on the main road, which almost on the outskirts of the city leads to the highway Lviv-Yavoriv. I anxiously think that the situation at the front must be changing by the hour if the corporal commander himself meets the division and turns it on the move. The division's turn to Yavorov was costly. Over the crossroads, barely we had time to skip it, the German aviation appeared. The tail of the division column was bombed, but I did not have long to watch the bombs bursting behind us. On the second approach, the German aviation hit the head of the column. My company escaped with few casualties as we quickly moved off the highway and dispersed in a grove. We moved on between raids. The units were mixed up. Cars went independently. Only with the appearance of our fighters, who cleared the sky, order was restored, but not for long. We rushed at the speed that our vehicles could give, and soon arrived at a new area of concentration at the place of Yavorov. Captain Skauchkov, the battalion commander, instructed me to take over a platoon of BT-7s from Lieutenant Colonel Bolkovitinov. Captain Mazayev's battalion was the first from us. Having met the captain, I asked him how his T-26s had fared. Nothing. All as one, he said, rubbing his hands together. Even this Petrenko, despite the accident, made it here. I have them all like that, one for all for one. In a word, masters. But in the 1st Battalion, 6 T-35s got stuck on the road again. Right, Captain Mazaev, Bolkovitinov's voice sounded nearby. He came up to us with his chief staff, Major Sitnik. Having barely listened to me, without reading the written order handed to him by me, he handed it over to the chief and talked to Mazaev about driving the T-35. Apparently it was a sore subject for him too. From their conversation I understood that in peacetime the crews of heavy V vehicles in the regiment learned driving and shooting on tanks of Mazaev's battalion, although the type of these tanks was very far from heavy. Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, said Mazaev hotly, but they were in first place in combat training. Damn this superiority. They had no accidents, no breakdowns simply because their vehicles were standing, and they were getting even on my old ladies. Which of the combatants was picked for accidents at every party meeting? Me. Who got the most reprimands from you? Mazaev. They rode on me. I was beaten. Mazaev, as always, embellishes, Bolkovitinov said with a grin. No, I'm not embellishing. Mazaev was getting hot. My mechanics before the war did not get out of their cars. But now they have survived 2 marches on old machines, and in the heavy battalion the tail still sweeps the road. You're right, but why get so hot? Bolkovitinov said conciliatingly, but now you will go to the head of the regiment. I hope you'll justify your trust, and what we had before the war has disappeared. I received an order from the Chief Stab and went to the 2nd Battalion to receive tanks. The commander of this battalion was not the kind who would give the best and keep the worst. I proved to him that I needed new tanks. He did not doubt it at all, but stood on the fact that he could use new tanks too. Finally, after a heated verbal altercation, I had to agree to take 2 new and 3 old BT-7. Now again my company is staffed, however. The tanks are different in their combat data. I took a diesel-powered BT-7M. The mechanic driver, Petty Officer Mikita Gadyuchka, a former collective farm tractor driver, a Poltavian, good-natured in appearance, but as I had already noticed, able to launch a sharp spike on occasion and doubtful about everything. They give him an urgent order from the commander. He scratches the back of his head, pulls up his pants and says, HM. So, Kajete, TSE soon need to. I can see in his eyes that he also questions my competence in technology. The mechanic driver of my burnt-out tank, Petty Officer Nikitin, I appointed him commander of the vehicle. He has a completely different character. On the face of this 22-year-old Volchanian athlete, who came to the army from the Pedagogical Institute, always intense attention. One thing is important to him: to be constantly busy. If in reconnaissance, so in reconnaissance he will say, and look already at the gun, in the combat section, or helps the mechanic. Nikitin always works hot, and when he does what needs to be done, and is satisfied with what is done, he says to himself, that's discipline. He understands discipline in a very broad sense. Captain Skachkov called me in and gave me the task of reconnaissance. I was to go into the field of action of the neighbouring tank division, collect data on the enemy, and submit to headquarters by 2:00 in the afternoon. The captain said that this division operates 10 to 15 kilometres west of Yavoriv. Having entrusted all the cares of the company to Krivula, I with 2 BT-7 tanks went on a reconnaissance. On the outskirts of Yavoriv, armoured cars with tankers' officers of communication were sniffing back and forth. From them I found out where the division I needed was located. In half an hour I was approaching the forest indicated to me. On the western edge stood tanks, rumbling muffled engines. Shells and mines were bursting in the forest in singles and volleys. By the rapid running of the tankers between the vehicles and the sharp commands in the turrets, get in touch with the commander, turret man, watch the company man, lieutenant, follow me, let's go forward. I realized that they were now going to attack. No sooner had I jumped out of the car than I saw red rockets falling from the sky between the sparse trees of the edge of the forest, and heard the voice of the commander of a nearby tank mechanic forward. The machine, snorting, burst out into the meadow. I ran out to the edge of the forest. From the forest, blowing blue smoke, jumped out of several tanks and rushed across the clean, uncut meadow. All of them kept a combat course directly to the west, to the place where in 1.5 kilometers from the forest on my map is a stream no more than a meter wide. Looking in the distance, 3 kilometers along the highway to Yavoriv, I saw German tanks. They were moving towards us in a battle order line and were firing. What kind of tanks went on the attack? I never found out. That's the trouble. At least catch up with the attackers and ask them, I thought with annoyance. I called the cars to the edge of the forest and drove along the forest. A group of commanders stood near the highway. Here I learned that the tanks of just the division I was looking for had gone into the attack, and standing to the side, I began to watch. Far away in the direction of Nemirov, where a cloud of smoke was rising to the sky, another group of tanks was attacking. But all my attention was fixed on the green meadow, on which each attacking vehicle was followed by 2 black greasy tracks. I could not understand why the tracks were so deep, why the tanks were going so slowly, and some of them even stopped and seemed to be lower than the ones coming next to them. Crews were huddled near the stopped vehicles. Soon only the individual tanks that had pulled ahead were moving. They caught fire one after another from the enemy artillery, rumbling like thousands of sledgehammers. Several German airplanes with split tails appeared in the air. They were circling and sending down smoke bombs. Purple streaks of smoke stood in the sky for a long time, like a smeared blot on paper. Damn it, they're showing the flanks of our fighting order, swore one of the commanders standing behind. A tank lieutenant, covered in mud, rode up to the group of commanders on a BT-7. I heard him, very worried, report that the tanks were stuck in a meadow, which turned out to be peat, that they were being shot at by German artillery standing in ambushes behind the meadow, in the bushes, in the grove, and the outermost gardens of the village, and that the German tanks were attacking. This was not entirely true. German tanks, hesitantly moving towards ours, not reaching the meadow, a kilometer away, turned towards Nemirov, under the cover of their artillery. The lieutenant had not yet finished his report when German aviation appeared over the meadow and peat fountains flew into the air. A liaison delegate from a neighbouring division advancing near Nemirov reported that the division was moving to the defence. Drawing on my map the information received from him, I saw that Yavorov was half enveloped by the enemy. With this information, I hurried back to my division. Recollecting how friendly and beautifully the attack of our tanks began, which rushed out of the forest to the meadow, I thought, but if it had not been for the peat bog, everything would have been quite different. You can't take a German by dashing, you need brains, says Nikitin, but I feel that here the matter is not in excessive dashing, but in some striking, absolutely incomprehensible to me carelessness. With the sunset began to approach, settling somewhere to our right, the other divisions of our corps. Late in the evening, about 23 hours, I was called to the headquarters to receive a new task. Only I came as Lieutenant General Rybyshev, and Brigade Commissar Popel arrived. In front of me, Vasiliev, with his smooth, coherent voice, briefly reported the situation, and with me the whole of the subsequent conversation of the superiors took place. I tried not to miss a single word to understand what was going on at the front. The situation seemed to me more than alarming, but the conversation went on in such a tone, as if everything was in order, and only that the neighbour made an unforgivable, criminal mistake, undertaking a tank attack without a preliminary reconnaissance of the terrain, for which he paid severely. The Germans are not fools, said Popel. Now, of course, they retreated somewhere on the flank to bypass us. From this I conclude that we will be recalled to the order of the front. Do you think so? Rybyshev asked. Definitely will be withdrawn, confirmed Popel. Today the front needs a powerful mobile reserve, a tank fist like us. Look, the Germans will strike tomorrow on the right flank. They are always changing the direction of the main blow. Yes, said Rybyshev. That's true. So, Comrade Colonel, for some reason suddenly spoke cheerfully Popel, turning to Vasiliev. Do your reconnaissance, but keep your troops ready to march. March again. No, I still do not understand something. During this conversation I was standing at the door. In the scanty light of the headquarters I could not see Popel. He never once came up to the light, but I already have some idea of him. I like the way he speaks, stretching his words a little and somehow rounding them off. I heard he was a commissar back in the Civil War. The German Air Force methodically bombed our neighbourhood all night long. I sat in the headquarters until morning, waiting for orders. Vasiliev didn't sleep a wink, he worked all night. Now, when I look at Vasiliev, I no longer think that here he is a hero, about whom legends go now he is for me just a division commander, but his professional soldier's stamina I admire. I am sure that no matter how difficult the situation, for Vasiliev it will always be only a situation, knowledge of which is necessary for him to work. I think that under any circumstances it is not events that will influence Vasiliev, but Vasiliev on them, and that reassures me. In the morning Popiel's prediction came true. The Corps has come under the command of the front. It was ordered to concentrate in the area of Kurovis-Zolochev by 14 o'clock on June 24th. So, again the march. The division headquarters goes the first echelon, and my company in the head of the column. The whole corps follows one road through Lvov, as the swamps to the north of the city do not allow us to bypass it. By 10 o'clock in the morning we reached the empty outskirts of Lvov. We passed a block, another, when suddenly machine guns began to crackle. It was clear that these were saboteurs. We had already heard that German parachutists had landed near Lvov. We decided not to stop in order not to block the movement of the columns. We closed only the hatches of the cars. We went a little further, and again from the attic of a two-story house a machine gunner struck. "We should still get him out of there," suggested Krivulia. I couldn't stand it either. Having hit the attic with Dechiaryov, we jump out of the car and run into the yard. In front of us is a back door. From the top of the stairs runs down a man with a machine gun in his hand, in a coarse, grey pinstriped suit. We press against the stairs. He jumps to the door to the courtyard. Stop, I shout and shoot, aiming for his arm. The saboteur drops the machine gun and runs without looking back. The second bullet catches him in the yard. There is an explosion in the street. Someone threw a grenade from the window. But we have to hurry, we can't hold up the whole column. We return to the cars and learn from a lieutenant border guard who ran past with a group of soldiers that the infantry has already entered the city and is clearing it of German parachutists, and that it is difficult because the Germans are dressed in civilian clothes. Immediately outside the city our column was attacked by German aviation. Raid follows raid after raid. The forest is nearby, it is on both sides of the highway, but you can't turn into it. The highway from Lvov to Vinnyky station goes in a narrow defile, between steep slopes of heights. The only salvation here is to pass at top speed, Krivulia says. I give the command, do as I do, and in 10 minutes we cross the railroad crossing at Vinnyky station. On the site of the station, piles of ruins are smoking. Look what it is, shouts Belevitiev in horror. He's driving my car. The tankers are looking at the roadbed. An echelon is burning near the crossing. Through the flaming hulks of half-broken cars can be seen charred black figures of people. Belevitiev in despair rushes to the train. Having given a command to the company to continue moving, I turn to the roadbed to wait for Belevitiev, just to keep up, but what I see near me makes me get out of the tank. A young woman lies dead at the crossing, covered with the burning wreckage of the car. Her hands are thrown back to her spun child, as if she is still trying to push him away from the terrible fire. The baby's glazed blue eyes stare at me, tears still in their corners. The child's white forehead is wrinkled around a small wound. So, not only bombed, but also shot with machine guns. I approach the train. Under the hulk of the outermost car, 2 charred corpses, it seems, of a girl. They lie hugging each other. Are they sisters or inseparable girlfriends who remained faithful to their friendship until death? But my God, how many charred corpses an echelon, and next to it the second. It's the kind of horror you'd never see in a nightmare. Tanks are moving across the crossing at low gas. Someone, standing on the tower, points at the charred corpses of children and women and shouts. Comrades, do not forget this. Death to the enemy. I shout too, shouting until Belevitiev returns. Mine is gone, he says quietly. We're back at the head of the column, stretching on the highway as far as the eye can see. It's hot, not a cloud. The German frame soars like a kite over the winding highway, freezes and suddenly falls on the column with a stone, lurching on one wing, and almost touching the telegraph poles, passes over us to soar into the sky again. On the move, we are firing indiscriminate machine gun fire at it. This forces the frame to stay aloft, but it keeps its eyes on us. On the side of the road, our fighter planes are crossing the highway and flying somewhere to the west. Having seen the frame, one Hawk deviates from the route, soars above it, but the German dives to the ground and, using the predominance of speed, escapes from pursuit. In a minute, the frame again hovers above us, and our Hawk, tearing up the engine, hurries to catch up with his comrades who have gone far ahead. Here, the German witch does not lag behind, mutters Nikitin, inserting the fourth disc in the machine gun. She will lead us into trouble. I feel that she will. Krivulia, sitting on the aft side of the turret, pounces on him. Listen, petty officer, you're not a crow, so don't crow. Do your job, and that's it. He's mad as hell himself. I understand his anger. How many times it was said and written to march secretly, so that the enemy could not see or know the direction of movement of the units, but today we are marching in full view of the Germans. I remember Popel's words that the enemy is always changing the direction of the main blow. This explains to me why we have to march to and from the front, but I can't make peace with the fact that we suffer heavy losses from German aviation during these movements. My heavy thoughts are cut short by Krivuli's shout. Junkers ahead on the course. Dark flock, glittering planes, turns from the sun, comes at us from the head, and behind it already comes the second squadron. I throw out a yellow flag and, waving it from right to left, I command the company turn around. My tank, slipping off the highway to the left, looping, rushing across the field. Nikitin's machine gun is fiercely shooting into the sky. Junkers dive on the highway. I look back, 2 platoons of my company scattered across the field, the 3rd platoon scattered, not knowing where to turn. Nikitin's machine gun suddenly fell silent, and I instinctively ducked my head into the turret. At the same moment I was thrown, swung from wall to wall. The car rocked from side to side, stumbled, but rushed forward again, precisely overcoming the obstacle. Missed. I raise my head. Bombs are exploding in packs behind me. The highway is covered with a curtain of sand. From under it, single cars burst out. The second squadron of Junkers, escorted by fighters, is turning to the highway. A random trio of our Hawks, following somewhere to the west, seeing Junkers, soars up and suddenly boldly throws into the thick of the line of German bombers. 2 bombers went up in smoke and crashed down, and the victors, apparently eager to use their speed, rushed at the Messer. That was below them. At the same instant, several Messers fell lightning fast on the Hawks from above. A silver serpentine of fire splashed. One Hawk, pierced by a line, flashed a torch, beeped down. But still the formation of Junkers scattered, and they go somewhere to the side. 15 kilometers east of the station Viniki, the village of Podborozets. It is full of refugees, crowds pouring into it from the direction of Kamenka. We made a stop here to give the stragglers a chance to pull up. Reporting to the headquarters at the call of the battalion commander, I saw Vasiliev running up to a car that had emerged from behind the column. In it sat a small, dense brigade commissar with a Georgian face. "Did you receive the order to go to Brody?" he asked Vasiliev. By his voice I immediately recognized Popel, whom I had not seen yesterday in the darkness. "I got it," said Vasiliev, calling out to the commissar. "Press, my friends, on the 4th speed and turn to Brody, and I'll rush to the crossroads and delay our rear coming towards us. Trouble will be if they crash into our columns," said Popel and, when the car had already started, turned around and asked, "Are you sending a reconnaissance team to Kamenka?" "That's right, it will be here in 5 minutes," reported Vasiliev. "Good." Popel nodded his head and drove forward on the highway. I received the task to go to the area of Kamenka, personally establish on what line the Germans came out, with what troops and whether there is our defence. By 16 o'clock I should arrive to the place Krasny, where by that time the division headquarters would be. All the refugees gathered in Podborozets, whom I asked, declared as one Panzerniks of the German are walking around Kamenka. From the border to Kamenka is not less than 50 kilometers. Are the Germans really already there? I doubted the reliability of the refugees' stories, but going on a reconnaissance with 3 BT-7s, I still outlined the boundary of a possible meeting with the enemy on the way to Kamenka. A stream of wagons, baby carriages piled with household goods, people on foot and on horseback, with bags over their shoulders, with children and chickens in their arms, comes out of the roadbed and spills over the steppe, flowing around our tanks. People look back in horror at the cloud of fires rising from the horizon and run, driven from behind by shouting and crying. Everyone is wet with sweat, clothes clinging to their bodies, but no one stops to take a breath, drink a sip of water, or wipe their dust-clogged eyes. Having turned off the road into the field, we run along the bank of the human stream. We notice in it small groups of fighters wandering to the rear. Outraged, I stop 2 Red Army soldiers. Both of them are of non-Russian nationality. They don't understand me well, but they try to explain that they are going to the rear because all the commanders in their unit are out of action. What to do? It is impossible to let them go. Every soldier, even for business, going to the rear is a reason for the crowd to panic. Get on the car, I command the soldiers. Let's go together. The soldiers willingly climb on the stern of the tank, look around, waving their hands, shouting cheerfully to someone. Come on, come here, let's go back. There is a commander, there will be war. Nothing to go back. Soon our tanks are full of troops. There is nowhere else to put those who want to go back. I ask the soldiers where the Germans are. They say that the Germans have not taken Kamenka yet, but they are approaching it from the side of Kristanopol. Did I do the right thing by putting those who went to the rear on my tank? Didn't I bring disorganization? If the front is broken, there is no one in front. Why am I taking them there? Let them go to the rear. That's the right thing to do. They'll be organized in the rear. But I don't believe the front is broken through. And if it's not, their place is there in front. I'll come back, report the situation, and the tanks will come at night. There can be no other decision. That's what I thought as I drove up to Kamenka. Somewhere to the north of Kamenka, tank guns were firing. The place was in turmoil and running. In the centre, at the crossroads of the streets, there was a pretty black-haired young woman in a white Galician shirt embroidered in red and black. She has a red flower in her hair. Despite the general turmoil, she is vigorously selling large, bright red strawberries. Seeing our tanks, the young woman breaks out of the crowd of Red Army soldiers around her and runs towards us. I stop the car. What can I get you? I want to treat the officer to some suniki, she says, pointing coquettishly at the strawberries. A glass of carbovanec, that's all, and without waiting for an answer, she hands me a neat bundle. Immediately the same bag is handed to Krivula. Not Pan. But comrade, I said sternly. Oh, how serious you are. Playfully wiggling her eyebrows and shoulders, she says playfully, We don't have such. The young woman calls the number of our building and pours the second glass into my bag. I worked in the canteen there. My husband was a petty officer in the regiment that was stationed at Sandover Vishnia. Didn't you meet his regiment? No, you didn't, did you? Aye. We were separated last week and then the war. We never saw each other again. Now I'm standing here at the crossroads, waiting for the second day. Maybe I'll meet him, or I'll see him. Who knows where he is? Where do you live, young girl? I'll meet my husband. What street should I come to? Suddenly asks Krivulia. I look at him. Is this heartthrob going to make love here? I live on Rava Street, on the right side of the house in the garden, she replies curtly. Come in, if you please. And when you'll be at the Corps headquarters, give the commanders Galia's greetings from the canteen. And she hurriedly left. We must delay. Krivulia said in my ear. Who? The spy, he nodded towards the young girl. What makes you think that? I laughed and gave the mechanic a command start. And from the fact, said Krivulia, that in Sandover Vishnia was a reconnaissance battalion of our division. The battalion commander was sighing about this very Vishnia today. There was no regiment there. In short, this beauty wanted to know something from us. I looked for the young girl. She was fidgeting between the wagons stopped at the crossroads, flirting with the riders. Well, take her on the rear tank, I said to Krivula. The highway to Rowa is on our way. You'll get off and check with her neighbours. What kind of bird? Then catch up with us, and I led the company from Kamenka to Radzafulv, from where the shooting was heard. Over the first slope west of Kamenka, I saw some men swarming in the green of the bread. On the deserted highway, the silhouette of a man was clearly drawn against the sunset. He stood with his back to me with his legs wide apart and his hands behind him. I approached him and saw that he was a Red Army soldier. He did not turn around, standing as petrified. Only when my tank snorted very close to him, he bounced aside without looking back. I stopped the tank and called a Red Army soldier to me. He turned out to be a petty officer. By the wrinkled face and manners of the formation man, it was immediately obvious that he was an enlisted man. I got out of the car. I poured questions into him. He answers thoroughly, unhurriedly. I learn that of all the commanders of his regiment, he is now the oldest. The others were killed while repulsing German attacks. Now he is gathering men, takes the defence. There on the right of the highway dig trenches remnants of the 2nd and 3rd battalions of the regiment. They have one gun. All the artillery is dead. How can you do that? I ask indignantly. The petty officer explains. The division stood east of Kristinopol. The warehouses were in the city, closer to the border. They were in the hands of the Germans before the division deployed. We did not have time to reach the prepared line of defence, as German tanks and aviation piled up. We had to defend on the field, flat as a plate, no trench, no hillock, and in 2 hours we found ourselves without ammunition. What can we use? We started to crawl back. But how could we crawl back? Tanks are rushing, crushing and shooting, but no weapons, no communications, commanders killed. So we ran, of course. That's when I became the regiment commander, grinning. The petty officer finished. What are you going to do now? I asked. There is no order to attack, so we have to dig trenches and defend. The Germans are right behind the bug, or maybe on the other side. Here I am standing, waiting for them in the north, and looking to the west. What he's counting on, I still don't understand. Does he really think he can defend himself with a few dozen men under his command? One thing is clear to me: this man will do his duty. The petty officer didn't see any German tanks. Several heavy armoured vehicles of the enemy tried to penetrate into Kamenka, but he hit them from afar with his gun, and they no longer show up. Well, petty officer, since you're not in a panic, take the replenishment. You see how many I've picked up on the road. Take them and command, I said, pointing at my paratroopers. Thank you for this, and thank you again. He was happy. Hey, on the tanks, go to line up? I was already sitting in the turret when he came up to me. Be careful, he said. There are only parts of my combat guard ahead. All right, yeoman. Well, goodbye. And for now, stand and hold on. Tomorrow our tanks will be here. Krivuli's tank is rumbling behind. I'm waiting for him. It's all right, Krivulia shouts cheerfully. Madam Spy is tied up in the car. He gets into my tank. We're moving off. You see, shouts in my ear Krivulia. When she showed me her house, I was not a fool. The tank in the side left and to the neighbours. One woman says I saw her at my neighbour's house 5 days ago. The neighbour said that she was a relative of his from Lvov. I went to another neighbour. No, he says, I don't know her. My neighbour never had a daughter. Then I drive straight to the yard, call the owners, and order the paratroopers to inspect the barn, attic, pits. The owner saw our beauty, sprinkled in gratitude, thank you for the ride to my daughter. And the beauty looks at the paratroopers after I look became whiter than white. The paratroopers jump out of the barn, shouting to me the dead are here. They found 3 dead Red Army soldiers from their regiment. I apologize, I say to the pretty girl, I'll have to tie your hands, madam. And the boys took her father to the barn, made an inquiry and passed sentence in the name of the Soviet power. We should have brought Carmen along with it. Now you have to deal with her like a fool with a stupor. See that you don't have to answer for this pupper, according to the law, I said to Krivula. What? He was surprised. According to the law, what are you? Am I not under the law? It's scary to drive towards the enemy on a deserted highway. I turn off into the rye, towards the groves. I'm sending out a patrol car ahead. It's moving, camouflaged by the groves. I give the signal to stop. Suddenly, out of the rye, like a frightened quail, a plain-haired woman with a child in her arms jumps out of my car. With a wild cry tangling in the rye, falling and rising, she runs towards the grove. Jumping down from the car, I quickly caught up with her. For a moment she looked at me with widened blind eyes and suddenly, apparently recognized in me her own Soviet commander, pressed herself against my chest and sobbed silently for a long time. I with difficulty calmed her down. In the morning, when the war began, she was at the outpost. Her husband sent her a note to take your son from the hospital and leave as soon as possible. Set fire to the outpost office. She set the office on fire, but she had hardly run out on the road when the Germans appeared at the outpost. With difficulty she made her way to the hospital, grabbed her sick child in her arms and ran out to the outskirts. For 2 days now she has been running through the fields in full view of German tanks, carrying her 5-year-old son in her arms, thin as a skeleton, with barely a shred of life in him. She has not drunk or eaten anything, her cheeks are sunken, her eyes are like those of a mad woman, but how they light up when she looks at her sick son. The Germans are 3 kilometers from here, in the village, she said. I've just come from there. Exactly confirming her words, German cannons struck from behind the bug. The shells flew over us. Krivula silently takes the child from the mother and helps her get into the tank. I don't say anything to him. He knows, as I do, that we have no right to do it, but we can't leave a woman with a child on the field under the fire of German guns, no, none of us can do that. When we were driving along the deserted highway towards the enemy, it was an unpleasant feeling a tank lurking in ambush was about to fire a shell into you. Everyone cheered up when they heard the enemy's shots. A smile played on their faces. Aha! Aha! Come on, come on! Joyfully shouts Viper at every shot of the enemy cannon. The Germans have given themselves away. The sausage makers are afraid. That's right. Krivula supports him. It seems that there are not many of them, some advanced detachment. Let's probe, suggests Nikitin. I am also tempted to send there the first shell from his new tank, but I hold back. We turn to the west, to the left behind the groves, and gully through the bushes to the stream. We move along the stream to the northwest, and in 2 or 3 kilometers at the exit from the grove we come across a village. Krivula notices some movement on the heights, at the southern edge of the village, and while I clarify the orientation and look around, he is already reporting. On the right in the east of the German gun and guard. Yes, there is no doubt. It's the Germans and they are not more than a kilometre away. The German cannon, often shrouded in smoke, fires in the opposite direction from us. So we're in the rear of the Germans. Zagumenki. I recognize the village by its characteristic high rise, gravel road and the winding bug. A German soldier descends from the heights down to the houses. I'd like to take a prisoner, sighs Krivula. He asks me to let him go with Nikitin, promises to be here in a quarter of an hour with this soldier. The offer is tempting. I want to see how they will do it, time in reserve it seems, and I agree. Keep an eye on us, and if you see any commotion down by the houses, cover us with fire, says Krivula. I'll give you a black rocket, he points to the rocket launcher he holds in his hand. Having ordered the crew of one tank to watch the village, the crew of the other back, behind the exit from the grove, loaded the cannon with shrapnel and put a machine gun on the platoon, I began to follow Krivula and the German gun on the heights. Having glimpsed in the vegetable garden of the nearest house, Kriv.Yulia and Nikitin disappeared somewhere and did not reveal themselves for a languidly long time. I saw a German soldier returning to the heights to the cannon, and they were still gone. I consulted with Gadiuchka whether I should shoot down the cannon and not break into the village to search for Krivula before it was too late. Don't be in a hurry. We'll still have time to bargain with our goats, said the Viper. Finally, I see them running, I sigh with relief, glory to you, but Viper, not hurrying, lazily stretching words, nonchalantly reports. TC are not wars, TSEA Germans are running to us. And those are wars, he adds, becoming animated. Now I can see that both ours and Germans are running. Ours are running along the low wheat. Nikitin is in the lead with some long sack on his back, supported by Krivulia. I at MU.H I run in front of them half a kilometre to the left, shouting something but not firing. It is clear that the Germans will reach the grove before they do. One more second, and the German artillerymen will pay attention to this running, notice us, and then all is lost, I decide, taking in the crosshairs of the gun. I think, will I miss first without taking my eyes off the scope, I pull the trigger. A cloud of bursts exploded at the cannon and cleared it from the artillerymen hustling near it. Not a miss, I determined, and raising my sights a hair's breadth, toppled the German cannon with a second shell. After my first shot, the machine gun of our left tank rattled, and Viper shouted joyfully below. Aha! Aha! Nemchura! OSVSE OSV Osi Kovbasniki. Now I turned my sight to the fleeing Germans, but it was no longer worth shooting. At the grove the Germans were mowed down by machine gun fire. Only 2 of them ran back, often stumbling and falling. Help! I heard the voice of a panting Krivuli. Nikitin was dragging a bound German to the stern of the tank. When the German artillery struck the grove where our tanks were standing from behind the heights and from the bridge, we were already leaving in high gear on the way back to Kamenka. Krivulia and Nikitin told me how they took a prisoner. Lurking in the vegetable garden, they were watching the German, who came down from the heights where the cannons stood. Having taken some water in a few jugs, he disappeared behind the house. They decided to cover him there and began to sneak up on him. Around the corner stood a tracked vehicle, on which a machine gunner sat with his back to them, and a chauffeur with a rifle in his lap was driving. The soldier gave them a drink from a tankard and went back. Krivulia and Nikitin let him pass, deciding to deal with the Germans sitting in the car. When the soldier with the canteen returned to the gun, they rushed one on the machine gunner, the other on the chauffeur. They wanted to take both of them, but Krivulia overdid it and hit the machine gunner on the head so hard that he fell down dead. We interrogated the captured chauffeur, having stopped before reaching Kamenka on the highway, where I was talking to the petty officer. Now there stood the colonel with a group of commanders. On the right side of the field, the infantry approaching from Kamenka was taking up defences, and on the left the artillery was taking up firing positions near the railroad. The prisoner said that he was from the light tank division of Kleist's army. From his words we understood that this division has the task of side cover of the army, which still at noon seized Radziko and Stojano. The information is important, we must hurry. We arrived in Krasny an hour late, but the headquarters was not here yet. After handing over the spy to the security authorities and wishing a happy journey to the wife of the border guard, we drove towards the division, whose movement was delayed by German air raids. The division stretched out on the highway and then left it again, waiting in a grove until our fighters cleared the sky. Whenever I had a free minute, my thoughts overwhelmed me. 3 days of war, only 3 days, and what a gulf in my mind separates peacetime from today's reality. In reconnaissance, I sometimes had doubts whether I was acting correctly, but I chased them away, assured myself that I was acting correctly. Now I again begin to doubt whether I fulfilled my duty as a commander in the reconnaissance. Yes, of course, the commander praised me for a thorough report, but I could have accomplished the task twice as quickly if I had not been distracted from my direct duties. Why was it necessary to collect on the way the retired Red Army soldiers, to catch a spy, to talk to and deal with the wife of a border guard? How much of the headquarters' valuable time it took? I was an hour late, and I could have returned before the appointed time, and we would have been on our way to meet the detected enemy. I blame myself for not being able, at such a crucial moment for the fate of the army, and at the same time I ask myself, could I, a Soviet commander, pass indifferently by what I saw. And why Vassiliev, for whom it seems there is nothing more sacred than the duty of a soldier, did not say a word when I, reporting the results of the reconnaissance, reported that on the way came distracted from his direct duties. Krivulya, that apparently has no doubt that we acted correctly. Again, Scout Bat moves in the head of the first echelon. My company guiding. Past Krasny. To Busk, where the bridge over the Western Bug, 2 more kilometers. The end of our column of tanks and cars is lost in Krasny. It seems that a huge grey caterpillar is crawling along the highway, cutting the dark green flood of the field, on which groves and farms look like islands. The sun is slanting toward the west. Where the sunset will soon dawn, a tributary of the Western Bug flows into it at an acute angle, the same one I ran over on the outskirts of Krasny. We move in a triangle of these rivers on the highway along the railroad. To the southeast, about 10 kilometers away, also at Brody, comes another division of our corps. It must be German planes circling over them. Somewhere to the left tank guns slammed. A shell rumbled angrily overhead, whined and exploded ahead on the highway. As if some spring turned and threw me to the left. I automatically threw out signals the enemy is on the left, do as I do. But I don't know what to do. I couldn't see the enemy, and where could he appear there from the river or something? But in the evening sunlight, a kilometer away from us, I saw the dead colour of iron on the living colours of the field. A sullen grey shaft separated from the grove and bushes. Drowning in the bright green of the field, it floated towards us. Here it reached the bare arable land, and the simple eye could already see the familiar to me commander's turrets, blunt-faced noses, thin tentacles of cannons. Ahead, at Busk, a chain of the same tanks slid off the highway to the left. Now it's clear. They appeared from Busk, turned to attack and, coming in from the left, want to press us to the Bug. Germans, they're attacking. Shouted Nikitin and hid in the turret, from where we immediately heard the clang of a gunbolt. Bolkovitinov's regiment is coming after us. I see that Mazayev took my signal and noticed the Germans, though they are still quite far from him. His battalion, turning abruptly to the left, crashes into the rye and stretched out in a line, silently marching towards the enemy. By the yellow and red flags transmitting signals, I recognize Mazayev's tank. Next to him, closer to me, waist-high out of the turret, the hero of the Soviet Union, Lieutenant Frolov, is moving to the right. In the distance, kicking up dust, the 2nd Battalion of Bolkovitinov's regiment is unfolding. What should I do with my little ones? Go on the attack or move forward to Busk? The Germans turn to the left of the highway. The instinct of self-defense pulls me to the right, to the Bug, glistening a kilometer from the highway. Firing from cannons, I retreat to the right and advance along the river bank towards Busk. Moving away from my own and Germans, who were bogged down in the battle, I approach the place by bushes. Here is already close to the first street, bumping into the river. There is a bridge. The thought flashes that we must cross it to get to Brody, and I shout to Krivulya, "Capture the bridge." He nods his head approvingly. That is my task, I firmly decide and repeat the go signal. I am tormented by the question of where the Germans came from. If from Radziofi, then all is lost, the bridge is in their hands, I will run into German tanks at it. But maybe they are from Kamenka, then I will be able to capture the bridge before they come to it. To the bridge on the street of the place about a kilometer. Just as long as I manage to capture it, and I will keep to the last, I think, and still once again look back at the battlefield. Bolkovitinov's regiment has turned around and is attacking. Mazayev's battalion is moving to the right, closer to Busk, apparently wanting to hit the Germans in the flank. Earlier I saw clear lines of vehicles, now our tanks do not hold the line. Roaring engines, blazing shots, overtaking one another, they rush at the enemy like herds of horses. 3 days of bombing, death of comrades, burnt corpses of children and women, echelons of death at Vinnyky Station, no mercy for the enemy. From the gardens of the western outskirts of the place is separated by a new rampart. Over there, in the distance, showed a third. At least 300 tanks. They want to slam us in the interfluve. I think, and shout. To the bridge, to the bridge. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Gas to the pipe. The car groans with exertion, bounces on the unevenness of the street, as if it wants to get off the ground. At the speed that only BT can boast, Viper drives the tank to the bridge. Just a little more. A right turn and we're at the bridge. Stop, stop. But Viper does not have time to slow down, and we skip further. We can already see another bridge over a tributary of Bug. Before our eyes, a German tank is driving off it. He hides in the direction of the battle. That's where the Germans are coming from Kamenka. Here I show a flag to the tanks following me. Here, under cover of the house, I leave Krivulia with all the vehicles except one, which I take with me, returning to the bridge over the Bug River. On the opposite bank of the river, the kitchens are smoking peacefully. Our artillerymen are feeding the horses. Apparently the battle has not yet caught them in the camp. They see the Germans will not understand where they came from, who is fighting. Deploy the guns, the Germans are behind us. I shouted to the battery commander, pointing with my hand in the direction of the battle. Having decided that here the defence is strong enough, I again go to the bridge over the tributary of the Bug, where I left Krivulia. There a heavy cannon fire had risen. While I was away, Krivulia pushed away from the bridge a column of German tanks approaching from Kamenka, surrounding the bridge in a semicircle, turning the guns and in the direction from which the Germans are approaching, and in the direction in which they passed, waiting to see what would happen next. Krivulia was the first to notice 5 German tanks moving on us along the river, shrubbery. Here, and I saw a white cross in the bifurcated green of the bush. They can't see us yet, but there is no doubt that they are called from the other bank by those tanks that Krivulia did not let cross. Though we are cut off, you gentlemen are too late. The bridge is already in my hands, I think, and give the command to prepare. Clearly I see the outline of the observation hatch of the driver of the German tank. It's time. The hatch of the German in the crosshairs of the sight. I press the pedal. My tank shuddered from the shots. From the middle of the German tank sputtered sparks. Open fire other tanks, waiting for my signal. At last people got to the enemy, which they had been chasing for 3 days. Now everyone wants to make his share in full. In the excitement of battle, the crews send shell after shell, not paying attention to the fact that the German tanks are already burning, that they already look like a sieve. I feel that people will not stop. I jump out of the car, run up to each tank in turn, knock on the turret with a crowbar, ordering to stop firing. Why am I not happy about this sudden success? I grit my teeth like I'm cold. Scared? No. It must be the anger that boils inside me. How could it be that the Germans are trampling our land? How did they end up here, so far from the border? It is necessary to help Mazayev from the flank. The Germans will not withstand a sudden blow, I decide. But even this instantly adopted clear plan of action does not soothe the heartache. Leaving Krivulia with 2 BT tanks and tankets, and giving him the task to die but hold the bridge, I with 3 BTs on the same road along the creek, along which 5 German tanks were coming to us, went to help Mazayev. Near a German tank set on fire by us around which bushes and a haystack were burning, I stopped. Now I could see the whole battlefield. Giant thin-barreled, smoke-painted trees are pointing up into the sky. But this is only the edge. To the right of me the smoky dense forest stands a solid wall. From there the enemy was advancing. There our heavy battalion is exterminating the aliens, driving them back to the crossing, towards me. Pillars of smoke converge towards me. The shrill howl of the engines overlaps the cannon salvos. The air groans. Only the sky is calm. But no, there is a sullen formation hovered over the field junkers. Suddenly one went up in smoke, went into a corkscrew. The formation falls apart, and high in the sky I see sharp-nosed, stretched forward our fighters. From the heights they stone one after another rush on the junkers, pecking them with fire traces. What are these planes? MiGs, I guess, MiGs of which I had heard so much on the eve of the war, but which I had not yet seen. That's what they are. 3 of them. They go up. And every time they meteorize across the sky, a burning junkers, tumbling and smoking, crashes to the ground. I scream with joy. 500 meters away from me, At the haystack, smoking flank car battalion Mazayev. 2 tankers quickly pelted with earth the flames that appeared from the engine compartment. In one of the tankers I recognized Senior Sergeant Petrenko. Not far from them, closer to the battlefield, is someone's tank BT. In the battle his gun was torn off. A German tank is rushing past it, heading for Petrenko. The BT shook with its curly body and, saving Petrenko, rushed at the German. A shell tore off its track. It was fired by the second German, who followed the first. By the force of inertia, during the turn the BT hit this German in the forehead. As if embracing one another in the last deadly fight, both tanks froze in place. The German tank went up in smoke from my shot, and the one that was heading towards Petrenko turned sharply to the right, trying to get behind the burning barn. At the same moment Petrenko's cannon shone, and the German tank, which was fleeing, burst into flames. And Petrenko jumped out of the smoking turret and, as if nothing had happened, began again to knock down the fire on the stern of his machine with earth. When I looked back, I saw a group of our vehicles circling the grove on the left, a dozen gaunt elms and low shrubbery. From behind the grove come shells. I guess that these are flights of Mazayev's tankers. Suddenly in the grove itself gunshots shone. Is it an ambush? Yes, of course. They're hitting our outflanking group. When my tanks hit the grove, there was an explosion. A candle of flame shooting up into the smoky sky. The grove goes up in flames. Another explosion and sheets of armor fly over the elm trees. Half-rounded, shooting back, the Germans are fleeing to the tributary of the Bug, but no longer to the bridge on which they came here and which is now in our hands, but somewhere to the left. The outcome of the battle was decided by a group of our vehicles, which bypassed the grove. I see Lieutenant Frolov's happy, smiling face rising above the turret. So that's whose company broke through to the flank of the Germans' fighting order. Well, we were lucky how timely we came to Frolov's aid. We noticed the ambush. Behind us, the second group of 11 SHPK-H heavy vehicles quickly passed along the highway. It is clear that they are hurrying to the bridge, so I cannot go back there until the end of the battle. Frolov wipes the sweat on his face with a flag, then waved to me, pointing forward, and shouted something joyfully. Right, inviting me to follow him. I turn the tank. The commander of my second car, Smirnov, repeats my maneuver. But why does not follow our example commander of the third car, Zubov? From the flaming grove rumbled tank cannon. A shell whistled above my ear. From the back of Frolov's turret sparks sprinkled. Frolov swayed and fell inside the machine. At the same instant Zubov's gun answered. At the edge of the grove from the bushes, still untouched by the fire, pulled smoke. Flames burst out. Well done, Zubov. And I am good. I decided that the ambush in the grove was over. Luckily, the German couldn't stand the fire bath and fired a minute earlier. Next time I will remember this and will not turn my back to him without firing at a suspicious place. We are squeezing the last group of German tanks. Frolov's tank goes next to me. Frolov is wounded. He often makes short stops. His bandaged head dives into the hatch. A shot is fired, and almost every time one of the German tanks blows a smoky tear into the sky. Without delay, we rush to the river. The pink glow of the fire glistened on the water, and on it a pontoon bridge with a dark patch. So that's where the Germans came from. Good. We'll close this way too. German tanks, in a hurry to get to the other side, huddled at the bridge. Frolov rushes forward, stops at the side, in the ravine, and the first shot sets fire to the tank on the bridge. The next tank, making its way to the other side, wants to push the burning, but still shell and it dies, firmly blocking the bridge. Crews of German tanks fall out of hatches and rush to the river. I catch on the sight of individual German tanks, but I'm sorry to hit them, they can be useful to us. It's over. On the western side, the Germans are blowing up the bridge to protect themselves from pursuit. I look back at the battlefield. A sea of fire rages in the thickening dusk. Burning trees, bushes, haystacks, green rye, iron tanks. The heat is blowing on me as from an open oven. Between the burning German tanks drive 2 kV. During enemy artillery raids, they lazily shoot over the river, as if they were spitting off the Germans. They contemptuously put their sides to the Germans. Their armor is invulnerable to ordinary enemy tank guns. Among the burning German tanks near the bridge, there are also those set on fire by me. I am drawn to them. Did I really destroy them? I can't believe such happiness. It seems to me too big, unbelievable. I remember how in my childhood I struggled for a long time, trying to make a detector radio, and when finally in the pioneer group with the help of comrades managed to make it, I couldn't believe that this real radio receiver was made by me, and everything was drawn to it. You go away. And then immediately back, at least to look at it once again. And so it is here. You would walk away from a German tank riddled with shells, and on some pretext you would come back, stand there again and admire your work. When Krivulya returned with his platoon, we had already concentrated in the grove together with Mazayev's battalion. After my departure, Krivulya, it seems, had a very hard time. The Germans almost broke into the bridge. The situation was saved by the division commander, who showed up at the place with his staff CVs. Krivulya says that Vasiliev praised us for the fact that we showed initiative, seized the bridge to Kamenka. Now I think I made a mistake. I should not have left. After all, if not for Vasiliev, we would have lost the bridge, and Krivulya would not have returned alive with his crews. I was wrong to rush into the attack. While I was thinking about it, the tankers had finished refueling the vehicles with ammunition and fuel. Some of them had already managed to get a hot lunch and, standing by their vehicles with steaming pots, were exchanging impressions. Petty Officer Smirnov invited me to have lunch with the company. My soul had been burning for tea for a long time, and I sat down to the group of tankers having lunch. The conversation did not stop. The trunks of trees, tanks, tankers, everything around in the glow of the fire seemed cast from red copper. Somewhere above, in the black sky, howled Junkers, hang lights, sometimes dropped single bombs. A tanker, in a dusty and smoky Kurzovka, pours me tea in an aluminum thermos. Thermos lid. His face has neither eyebrows nor eyelashes. His cheeks are blistered. Something about him, though, is familiar, and when he, holding out the mug to me, begins to speak, I recognize him as the commander of the burning car, Staff Sergeant Petrenko. It's not clear, he says, where the Germans came from. Petty Officer Smirnov, sipping his tea, slyly looks at him and ironically remarks, "From where?" "From Germany." "So you think we're retreating?" asks Petrenko. Irony changes Smirnov. "Yes, it seems so today," he says gloomily. Petrenko's burned face wrinkles. He turns to me with heat. "Comrade Senior Lieutenant, what's the matter? I don't understand. Why do we go back and forth on the roads? Doesn't anyone know where the Germans are?" Remembering again the night conversation in the headquarters, I repeated Puppel's words that the enemy, taking advantage of the suddenness of the attack, every now and then changes the direction of the blow, and we have to catch him. What I thought before chaos, confusion, now looks different. I already feel that we are maneuvering, not just retreating on the back roads. I'm trying to tell Petrenko that. After silence, he poured tea, sipped it, smacked his bite and said, "And yet we are retreating, aren't we, Comrade Senior Lieutenant?" "No, not retreating, but chasing after the enemy tanks that had broken through." Smirnov, turning his back to the burning field, said, "Yes, nicely cut, under the nut. Now things will go." I asked him if he had not seen where Bolkovishyav was when the fight broke out. How could he not? He spoke excitedly. He was nearby, car to car. As soon as the first shells whistled near the bridge, he stopped his KB near us. I heard that Bolkovitinov wanted to strike with a heavy battalion, but he couldn't get in touch with the commander. So he gave up on everything, leaned out of the turret up to his waist, and signalled with flags to the approaching battalion. That's how he went on the attack. He's always like that. Well done. The tankers started talking. A delegate of the headquarters communications came up to me and passed me the order of the commander together with him to report to the commander. On the way to the division headquarters, the communications delegate told me with admiration how the division commander went on the attack.